Republican-led investigation in the state of Michigan found no evidence to support former President Donald Trump's claims of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. The Michigan Senate is the latest state legislature to release a report that upholds the results of its election. Every Republican member of the Michigan Oversight Committee adopted the report. State Oversight Committee Chairman Ed McBroom says the report aimed to provide answers to people who are looking for them, and that certain things that are speculated are not possible. The report debunks several fringe election conspiracy theories like, quote, a machine error switched votes in Antrim County and the tabulators at the TCF Center in Detroit, where absentee ballots were counted, were connected to the Internet, allowing outside parties to tamper with the results. So, Joe, here we are again, court after court after court, and now state legislature after state legislature, including those led by Republicans, showing there was no fraud in the 2020 presidential election.
Well, right. And court after court after court, Trump judge after Trump judge after Trump judge, Trump Supreme Court justice after Trump Supreme Court justice after Trump Supreme Court justice has ruled, either by ruling or by not ruling, that there is no systemic voting fraud that changed the outcome of the election. Rudy Giuliani actually said so inside of a federal courtroom because Rudy Giuliani didn't want to be sanctioned by that court. They would always go outside, they'd have their press conferences, and then you'd look at their pleadings and you'd look at what they'd say inside the federal court, and they wouldn't do anything because they didn't want to lie to a federal judge. They didn't want to be sanctioned. And so here we have the state of Michigan, where I've had one conspiracy, friends, relatives send one conspiracy theory after another about Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and they have all of these lies. And they said, well, what about this? What about that? Well, Republicans in Michigan, they studied it in depth. And they actually were quite critical of those liars. They were quite critical of those conspiracy theorists. And so they actually put out a report that said it is all a lie. There was no widespread voting fraud in the state of Michigan. Everything was run pretty straight. But, you know, what's so irritating, Willie, and I'm sure you've heard it and a lot of us heard it, is people will go on, family members, friends will go on, let's say, Chinese cult websites.
Yes.
And they'll and literally websites run by Chinese cults. And then they'll come to you and they go, well, this is what it says. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just saying. It just look what it's saying. It's all very Trumpy. I don't know. Somebody's saying this. And so you disprove that. And they go, okay, well, yeah, but wait, somebody's saying that. And we get from that point to where a majority of Republicans believe that American democracy is rigged. That's just depressing, that they're that stupid and that they hate America that much, that they could search for the truth, but they decide that they're going to read websites from Chinese cultists, from Russian propagandists, and believe that instead of Republicans, instead of Rudy Giuliani, instead of Trump judges, instead of the Trump Supreme Court, and now instead of these Trump legislators in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, I've heard them all. It's a bottomless pit of conspiracy theories. People come up to me days after the election and say, why aren't you guys talking about the Italian satellite that manipulated the election? Come to find out just in the last couple of weeks that the White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was pushing that, the Italian satellite theory, that somehow some server in Italy was changing votes. I don't even know the particulars of it, but we're seeing it in Arizona, where this group, the Cyber Ninjas, at the behest of the Republican-controlled Senate, is rifling through that state's voting machines and looking through the data there. They've tested for bamboo, traces of bamboo, on the suspicion that some of those ballots were shipped in from China. That's actually happening, and it's sponsored by the state legislature there. Let's talk more about this with political analyst and columnist for Politico magazine, Jeff Greenfield, co-founder of the data firm Echelon Insights, Kristen Soltis Anderson, and research director for the Democracy Fund Voter Study Group, Robert Griffin. Good morning to you all. Welcome back to New York, Jeff. Good to see you.
Nice to be here.
So this new report from Robert's group out just this morning looking at what damage these lies about the election can have on future elections. The report reads this way, quote, While every political race generates some degree of distrust among those whose preferred candidate has lost, the acceptance of that loss, aided by the conciliatory words and actions of losing candidates, allows our country to move forward. Trump's failure to abide by those conciliatory norms and his role in actively stoking conspiracies and anger among his supporters has left many worried that he has done significant damage to our democracy. So that's the top line there. Robert, if you can dig through a little deeper your report, what else does it tell us?
Well, and thanks for having me, by the way. I think it tells us two things. One is a very familiar story. And the very familiar story is that people who lose elections, that is to say people who are supporters of the losing candidate, tend to distrust elections more than the people who supported the winning candidate. That's really normal. That happens election over election. There's nothing really new there. What is unusual about 2020 is because of this campaign of lies by the president and significant portions of the Republican Party, we are seeing these unusually high levels of distrust among Republicans this election cycle. And as we say in the title of the report, we think it's a crisis of confidence. There is just really, a significant level of distrust among Republicans. And now we're 8 months out from the election, and we're really not seeing these levels dissipate.
Kristen, and I'm sure you saw the same thing coming. I have a lot of Republican friends in Georgia who were worried leading up to the Georgia special election. And they're saying, we wish the president would just shut up because he's going to make Republican voters stay home by saying voting in Georgia is rigged. And you talk about the law of unintended consequences. The Democrats have Chuck Schumer as majority leader, in part based on at least Republican field workers that I talked to, in part because Republicans said, oh, it's rigged. I'm not going to waste my time going out and voting. And sure enough, you look at Republican areas, turnout was much lower than it was during the election.
Massive unintended consequences that are rippling throughout this Congress because Republicans don't have 50 votes. This was, as you know, in some ways very predictable. I mean, Donald Trump contested saying that there were fraudulent votes, millions of fraudulent votes in an election that he won in 2016. So his behavior after the 2020 election in some ways was not surprising. But I think there were two other big factors that made 2020 just really a petri dish for a lot of this stuff to fester. One was the narrowness of the win, the fact that you had a handful of states where things were very, very close. Imagine an election like 2000 where it was just focused on Florida, but you've got so many other states that are just as close. That creates a further breeding ground for controversy and places for people to pick and find conspiracies, but also the length of time that ballots take to get counted. Now, yes, some of this was driven by COVID and the massive spike in mail-in votes, but you've got some states like California and New York that always take a long time to count ballots. And when you begin adding swing states into that mix, places like Pennsylvania, et cetera, I mean, it's not healthy for America that Steve Kornacki had to be up for 100 hours straight as ballots came in. It's not healthy for Steve Kornacki. It's not good that ballots take so long to count. And a lot of these states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, they need to update their laws so that they can behave, frankly, a little more like Florida, which also has for a long time had expansive mail-in voting, but they count those ballots fast. It creates less time for this nonsense to fester.
It is, Willie, that is such a great point. And it's such a great point that we made it in the days leading up to the election. And we made it because the Republican legislatures in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin refused to allow the ballots to be counted early, the absentee ballots to be counted early. Like they were being pushed so we could know who the winner was election night. And we said before the election, go get the tape. We said before the election, by them doing this, this is going to allow them to drag out these states where Trump may be able to keep it closer with early votes. And Kristen's exactly right. If they had listened to a lot of election reformers, and if Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania would have, if those Republican legislators would have done what the Democratic governors asked them to do and others asked them to do by letting them count their absentee votes early, like Ron DeSantis and, well, Jeb Bush and Florida governors have in the past, well, they would have known that Biden won Michigan by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that night. They would have known that he won Wisconsin probably by midnight. They would have known that he won Pennsylvania maybe by early the next morning. But they refused to do it despite the fact that we were warning them and other people were warning them that it was going to cause chaos.